includes command roles in the Pacific as well as in the Gulf. So he's seen a lot of different parts of Coast Guard operations and is going to be talking to us today about the Coast Guard mission in Antarctica. And I can think of no one who's better positioned to be giving these remarks. We're honored to have him here today. I'm grateful. And please give a warm welcome to Admiral Peter Godier.
Thanks very much, Dr. Pincus. And so you're hereby obliged to sit at the edge of your seats, I think, is what I heard from Rebecca. It really is a pleasure to be here at this event sponsored by the Wilson Center here in this great auditorium. I understand there are a lot of folks who are joining us online as well, so I'm going to strive to look at wherever the camera might be that's recording somewhere over there. Okay, because I heard perhaps hundreds of individuals are joining us online. And, you know, so thanks for being here after lunch on the second day of a conference. I think that in and of itself might be an accomplishment. I see some nods here. And look, I know that we say a lot of ground has already been plowed, but I think it's probably only appropriate to say some ice has been broken here on a lot of different topics leading up to what I intend on discussing here for just a few minutes. And so what I'd like to do is maybe just open it up with a few comments in terms of Coast Guard, how we view our role in Antarctica and in the high latitude regions in general, and then where we're at in developing the kinds of capabilities that we need to operate in those regions. And then I want to leave some time for Q&A because I think the fact of the matter is that we really have the Antarctic brain trust here in the room. And I'm struck by, for those of us who had the real pleasure of attending the event at the Chilean Embassy last night, and thanks very much to the government of Chile and the sponsors for holding that event. It is a real fellowship, right? You all know each other. Many of you have worked with one another for many, many years. You're all passionate about science, about safety, about security in the Antarctic regions. And so whether you're a policymaker, scientist, storyteller, operator in Antarctica or the high latitudes, I think the fellowship here is something very special, and reflecting that it seems that none of you have been able to recall a conference like this solely on Antarctica, if I'm getting that right. So I think in that sense, we, and Coast Guard included, tend to talk about the high latitudes. We talk about the polar regions, and we spend most of that time talking about the Arctic. It's only natural that we're doing that, given that we consider the United States as an Arctic nation, and our partners in the Arctic Council have lands and exclusive economic zones in the Arctic region. But I think it's particularly important and highlighted by the fact that we're all here today that we actually spend some focus and some time on Antarctica, and I give the Wilson Center credit for that. So we're here to talk about the rules-based order in Antarctica and global challenges. And you know, when I was growing up in this organization, I think I and we and folks in general thought of the Antarctic region as really just a focal point of global scientific research and cooperation, a place where all nations come together, set aside your differences, and work towards the advancement of human knowledge and the protection of the unique and fragile ecosystem there. Now, maybe I'm being a little bit naive in having thought that years ago, but the mere title of this conference implies that it's not that anymore, right? The geostrategic challenges, the climate change, rapid climate change, all the things that I think you've already covered with exquisite expertise implies that we have issues and we have challenges. Things are changing. So really, today I am here to do a couple of things. I want to convey to you the Coast Guard's dedication and support as a force provider in the region, and share with you some milestones and achievements that we are making to develop those kinds of capabilities and sustain what we're doing in the Antarctic region. But really, more than that, what I'd like to do is paint a picture where the Coast Guard is going in terms of serving the interest of the U.S. government specifically, and then how we are and intend moving forward to contribute to our collective's efforts to reinforce a global rules-based order, the title of this conference generally. So maybe it'll just be helpful for me to take a moment and describe how Coast Guard leadership views our service value to the nation. So it's true that our service, we're chartered by 11 statutory missions to deliver services to the American people. But when we look at our missions as a whole, we begin with a view that our national prosperity has always been inextricably linked to the fate of the maritime transportation system globally, and that our national security interests hinge on global international order that was secured 80 years ago with the blood and treasure of the United States and our allies during World War II, so that all nations can advance in security and prosperity according to their own abilities. The Coast Guard is in the vanguard of this effort in the maritime domain because Congress has consolidated in the Coast Guard a set of authorities and capabilities that best position us to lead the federal governance over maritime safety and security. Because over our 232 years of history, we have built with partners a system of governance that strives to be transparent, inclusive, and effective in managing competing demands together with diverse set of stakeholders. Because of all that, we know that the enduring role of the Coast Guard is to understand the strategic environment in which we operate, to anticipate transformative changes in the physical environment with nation-state threats, in technology, in operations, and in maritime governance, and to lead in ensuring the safety, security, and environmental stewardship over our global maritime commons. So this isn't just a proposition for the polar regions. This is how we view our role domestically, stretching out internationally and globally to protect and preserve our own national security interests through a shared view of what maritime safety, security, and stewardship should look like based on the global rules-based order. So that, quite simply, is maritime governance. And at the end of the day, we view the Coast Guard as America's maritime governance force. Whether it be the Coast Guard cutter Healy, which has just completed a successful mission in recovering the scientific research buoys right on the Russian maritime boundary line in the high Arctic. They just completed the NABOS recovery a few days ago, and they will be in Tromsø, Norway on Saturday, and then making way over time to pull into Charleston and then back around to complete its global tour back into home port in Seattle, Washington. A science mission, but with the ability to be present in a region to assert our U.S. interests and, by extension, our collective interests as we espouse through the Arctic Council and our partner nations up there in the Arctic region. But it's also things like the Coast Guard cutter Kimball, which just a couple of weeks ago encountered a Russian fleet that was doing a summer exercise within the U.S. EEZ off Alaska. Perfectly legal, appropriately notified by the Russian fleet to us, but we were there with the Coast Guard cutter to preserve the interests of the U.S. fishing fleet so they would not be harassed. Or like the Coast Guard cutter Alex Haley a month earlier, which together with the U.S. Navy encountered a Russia-China combined surface action group that came up north past Japan and then up and around and through the Aleutian Islands and down south to be present, to be watching, to signal that presence equals influence and that we were going to assure that all behaviors would be in accordance with these global international rules. Or on the other side of the planet, like we do every day with our fleet of 6 fast response cutters working for the 5th Fleet in Bahrain, in the Arabian Gulf region, in an area where Iran is boarding and hijacking tonnage frequently. Again, Coast Guard present, reinforcing international rules-based order around the globe as examples of our view of ourselves in terms of international maritime governance. So to understand now, scoping this into Antarctica, how we view our role there, it might be helpful to understand quickly where we've been. In the late 1950s, the Coast Guard cutter Eastwind became the first vessel to ever circumnavigate the Antarctic continent, a feat that showcased our capabilities and commitment to this remote region. And in 1965, the Coast Guard became the sole provider of government icebreaking support, a role that we took up from the Navy's Wind-class icebreakers, and we've never looked back. In the 1970s, the Coast Guard cutter Glacier, a veteran of 29 Arctic and Antarctic deployments, played a crucial role in Operation Deep Fleet Freeze that continues today, a series of missions that facilitate the establishment of our permanent research stations in Antarctica. And then you fast forward to the 1990s when the Coast Guard cutter Polar Sea made a historic voyage to become one of the first surface vessels to reach the North Pole, an accomplishment that was most recently repeated by the cutter Healy Ken Boda. That was you right there, Captain Boda, reaching the North Pole with the cutter Healy. In most recent times, the Coast Guard has responded to emergencies that have helped ensure the safety of those who venture out into the remote waters off of Antarctica. In 2012, the cutter Polar Star played a role in the rescue of the fishing vessel Antarctic Chieftain, which had become trapped in the ice. The mission underscored our commitment to the safety and a readiness to respond in emergencies in the high latitudes. So from 1950 to now, operations in Antarctica are now woven into the Coast Guard's DNA. The capability and know-how to operate there is something that we take great pride in, and our workforce, we have a workforce that is small but powerful subset of the overall Coast Guard that are red hull sailors. It's a small community like Ken Boda and like Keith Ropella that you heard from earlier today, who have been there, who have seen it. I know they told a lot of sea stories, right? Like gloom and doom and not seeing the horizon for weeks and weeks and water over the bow and the transom smashing into the bridge. Did I get that right? I'm sorry, I can't quite match the excitement of that, but it's important to have the people who know this region, who have been here, there, who know how to operate, like you, many of you who are personally invested in the region. So I mentioned the Coast Guard's role in maritime governance around the world. How we do this in Antarctica is as a force provider, the National Science Foundation, the Department of State, and NOAA. Our endeavors in Antarctica is our team sport, and our collaboration's not just an obligation, but it really is a true partnership and a real affinity for the Coast Guard. The permanent stations in the National Science Foundation operates in Antarctica rely heavily, as you know, on the annual support provided by the Coast Guard, along with the U.S. Air Force and Air National Guard, and on occasion the U.S. Army. This collaboration has been an example of unity and shows us all what can be achieved when we act together. So when we support NSF, we know that providing access to resupply, we're directly supporting a host of research projects ranging from climate studies to geological explorations. Our collaboration with Department of State is instrumental in upholding the principles of the Antarctic Treaty. By allowing the access from State Department inspections of foreign stations, we ensure compliance with the treaty, reinforcing what we hope and strive to be a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect among the participating nations. The last time we did this was in 2019 aboard the Polar Star, and through those joint efforts, we're committed to continue doing our part to provide those access so we can continue our obligations on the Antarctic Treaty and as a steward of the region. Our engagements with NOAA helps vital research into the maritime ecosystems and rich biodiversity of the Antarctic region. But it doesn't just mean research. In the 2022 to 2023 season, Coast Guard Activities Europe of all locations, we have a small contingent there on the prevention program side, applied our marine safety authorities alongside Chilean and Argentinian counterparts to conduct investigations into the deaths and injuries of 5 U.S. citizens that occurred while they were on cruises in Antarctic waters. So all these missions we do domestically can extend when we have authorities down to the Antarctic region. So the Coast Guard does its work in the Antarctic region on behalf of the NSF, NOAA, and State Department specifically, but in the broader sense, we do it on behalf of the U.S. government and Americans in general, and by extension to the participants in the Antarctic Treaty and like-minded allies and partners. But everything we do, whether that be supporting the treaty inspections or resupply of McMurdo Station or conducting search and rescue operations or investigations into incidents, a Coast Guard asset, a red-hulled Coast Guard icebreaker, all the way down to a uniformed Coast Guard Sentinel, represents our U.S. sovereign interests, exerting influence by our presence and by extension, the reinforcement of the global rules-based norms. So capability is important, and you can't exert influence without being there. And from the remoteness and the weather in the region, that means a commitment to the investment in right capabilities that can reliably operate in the Antarctic region. And I know that Ken and Keith talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to just give you an update. I thought there might be some interest in what our ice-breaking capability will be moving into the future, specifically how our polar security cutter build-out is going, if that's of interest to you folks. I just talked to our Deputy Commandant for Mission Support, who's in charge of this acquisition. And you know, I think our message here is that building the first heavy polar icebreaker that the U.S. has ever built since 1976 was always promised to be a complicated endeavor. And we acknowledge the challenges in crafting such first-in-class ships, right? So when you build a naval vessel, new class, this tends to happen. You can ask the U.S. Navy that same question. But I'm pleased to say through our Integrated Program Office, which is a joint Coast Guard Navy office, we're making progress. So we have contracted, now it's Bollinger, Mississippi Shipyard, with delivery of 2 polar security cutters. The first one under contract was supposed to be delivered by 2025. We know that that date is not going to be met. Because of the complexities of this build out, the next step for us is to get the detailed design of this particular type of hull before the shipyard can move forward in making advanced, and beginning to make some of the more advancements on constructing the hull. You have to have the detailed design right before you get too far into the construction, or then there's a whole lot of rework you're going to have to do in the end in a voyage of discovery, and we really want to avoid that. So it's a matter of maturing this design before we can really have a rock-solid estimate of when the PSC-1 is going to be delivered. I will give you a rough estimate of around 2029. We will adjust that estimate when Bollinger gives us a more refined, detailed design. But we do think that construction will be able to commence in Q2 of fiscal year 2024, and then with an expected timeline about four years after that. Here's the thing. We're not just building a ship, we're building a shipyard. With the state of the American shipbuilding industry for naval vessels, and with a new build of this type of class for the first time in 4 decades, we are building this shipyard to be capable of continuing the good work for the Coast Guard, for the United States Navy, whatever contracts they decide that they can achieve. So we expand the defense industrial base so we can continue to have these sorts of ships constructed at price and on time. And so we are making progress. In the meantime, as we get the detailed design, we've entered an agreement so that Bollinger, Mississippi Shipyard can move forward on fabricating prototype hull plating sections. So the complexities of more than an inch thick steel that has to be heated before you weld the structures within it, it's a novel design. And so they're testing this on a series of low-risk hull plating sections. The first was done successfully, we're pleased to say, and the second one is underway. We hope that then those can be employed in the actual ship itself as it's being built. It's going to be a great ship, capable of breaking through multi-year consolidated pack ice in the harshest conditions on Earth, equipped with the latest Navy-owned equipment, modular storage, reconfigurable spaces, it really is going to be a versatile platform that's going to serve our resupply efforts in McMurdo and be flexible to do some other things when it's delivered in the out years. Now, as we look at the first two that we have under contract, we've done an analysis to determine how many we think we need in our ice-breaking fleet to cover our obligations and our future projected missions, not just in Antarctica, but in the Arctic also. Our studies have shown we believe we need 8 to 9 icebreakers, a combination of heavy and medium icebreakers, so that we can operate persistently in the U.S. Arctic off of Alaska, and then also on the Atlantic Arctic side, while we also, using heavy icebreakers, can cover our obligations in Antarctica. We've also asked for funding in the upcoming budget, perhaps not a great conversation to have today on the fiscal year budget, for a commercially available icebreaker to help us bridge and have a medium icebreaker in our portfolio that we'll put to good use. We'll see what Congress comes up with and when they come up with it. So to bridge this gap, I think Ken talked a little bit about what we're doing to keep the Polar Star serviceable until we can deliver the first 2 Polar Security Cutters. Our plan is, through a service life extension program multi-year, we'll keep the Star operating, serving McMurdo seasonally, while we build these icebreakers, and then we will retire Star once we have 2 there. I got to tell you, as a naval engineer by origin, and as a guy who visited Vallejo Shipyard many times when the Polar Star has been there, this is a multi-year, incredibly complicated service life extension program. Usually the Coast Guard does this all at once, and it'll take a year or 2, but we've been breaking it up into 5 chunks so we can continue to operate in the Antarctic seasonally. It has been a remarkable success so far, completing the 3rd, and Star is going to come out here to get underway in November for the mission in McMurdo. I can't be more pleased. It's a testament, really, to the quality of work that Mare Island Shipbuilding has been doing, and to the quality of work of our Coast Guard engineers. I take no credit for it, but they've done a remarkable job to bridge that gap. So, as I said, I'm really interested in your thoughts and questions, looping back into how we view our role in terms of governance, confronting the challenges that you've talked about yesterday and this morning. So, Dr. Pincus, I will turn it back over to you to see how you want to handle this.
He's got a mic right there for you.
Ask how much. Would it be fair to ask how much this costs?
What is this?
Well, the classic icebreaker, the one due in 2029.
Of course it would be fair. Congress asks all the time. So the bids came in around $800 million. We originally anticipated about $1 billion per hull. The fewer ships you produce, the higher the price is, and then you add the novelty of this particular design or of a polar breaking design. So that's what things are looking like now. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Admiral Gautier. That was fantastic. I am delighted to now welcome our next panel on partners and relationships in Antarctica. Dr. Kelly Faulkner will be chairing this panel, and we will be joined in person by Dr. Marcelo Lepe, Director of the Chilean Antarctic Institute, and by Dr. David Hick from Polar Knowledge Canada. Thank you. Online, we are lucky to have Dr. Sarah Williamson, Director of Antarctica, New Zealand, and Dr. Scott Borg, who recently left NSF's Office of Polar Programs. Dr. Faulkner, the panel is yours.
Thank you very much, Becca. First of all, I want to thank the Wilson Center for putting together this event. It's certainly been a highly engaging and informing one, so thank you so much. And then for putting some focus on partners and relations, which is what we'll get to right now. I do want to say Dr. Borg was not on the original agenda, and we're really delighted to have another voice from NSF. I think Dr. Borg's last position at NSF was the the deputy to the assistant director for the Geosciences Directorate. So we'll hear from him shortly, but there he is, right above my head. Okay. So with that, I really want to turn it over to this distinguished group. And if you wouldn't mind just saying a word or two about your role, introduce yourself briefly before you deliver your remarks. And I'm looking forward to this group telling the audience here about a number of relationships and partnerships that are absolutely critical to operations in Antarctica. So, Sarah, over to you.
Kia ora, kei te mahi aho ki te tiri o te moana Aotearoa. Hello, I'm Sarah Williamson, Chief Executive of Antarctica New Zealand, and I am going to do, if I can, a share screen. I can get this to work. Just bear with me. There we go. I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the partnerships that we have in place, but I'm going to start with Antarctica New Zealand itself. So we are a smaller program. We will take around 450 people through Scott Base in any one season. We have a round the year presence and have about 110 beds, so we're relatively small. Our mission is to ensure that Antarctica and the Southern Ocean is valued, protected and understood. And we rely very heavily as a small program on our relationships with other entities and our partnerships that we have in place. One of our most key partnerships, this is a picture of Sir Ed Hillary in the middle, and Admiral Dufek, who had, we understand, a very close relationship. So in 1957, Scott Base was set up with the
I'll
assistance.
just interrupt you briefly, Sarah. Just so you know, the slides you may be looking at on your screen are not projecting here. You're making yourself quite clear without them, but if you'd like to just be aware that they're... Yeah.
Thank you. All right, I shall keep talking.
They're in the reflection on your glasses, someone just commented. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. Shall I keep talking without the slides?
Please do.
So the relationship that we've had with the US goes back to 1957. It started with the Transantarctic expedition when Scott Base was set up. And Antarctica is of strategic interest to New Zealand. It's on our southern flank, and Scott Base is our home on ice. In the Rossi region, which is roughly the size of France, we have a relationship with the US, but we also have a relationship with Italy, Korea, France and Germany, who have a summer station, and with China, who are building a station at the moment. So when Antarctica New Zealand was set up in 1996, there were three aims. One was to have presence in Antarctica. One was to support and enhance the quality of science, and the last was to have relationships with others who have similar views to ourselves. So the need for us to have relationships widely and with our stakeholders is enshrined in legislation and is at the very heart of how we were set up. So we have a number of relationships. Our closest relationship is with the US, who are just 3 kilometres away over the hill. And we also have a relationship with parties as we look to manage our way through the marine protected area in the Rossi region, which is one of the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere at 1.5 square kilometres. Christchurch, New Zealand is one of 5 gateway cities, and that means that we are a stopping off point for a number of nations that use Christchurch to move goods and people through to Antarctica. And so within the Antarctic environment, we want to make sure that we do the best as a gateway nation for those countries that are heading south, that we make it easy, that we support them well, and that we set up businesses in Christchurch that can support. There have been some very successful businesses set up in Christchurch, and the efforts that we provide, especially through things like COVID, to make sure that people can travel south, we take that very seriously. Logistics are very complex on ice. As you will know, everything that you take in, you also have to take out. So every put in that we have with science requires multitudinous amounts of planning, and often we work alongside other entities in other countries, in particular where we have science that is multi-country. So at the moment we have what's called a SWACE 2C, which is a drilling operation in the edge of the Saipol coast. That's about 1,200 k's away from Scott Base. And that is a six-nation scientific endeavour that requires everything to be taken into the field and everything to be removed from the field. So as well as logistics getting to and from the continent, logistics getting out to science with multi-partner science activities can be quite complex as well. So without sharing Defence Force assets, without sharing fixed wing and helo, and without sharing logistics equipment, some of those scientific endeavours would not happen. In addition, we have long-term science. So there are some science sets that have been on the run since 1957, and we want to make sure that we don't miss years. Some of those scientific data sets are in conjunction with others around the globe and are used as a measure of what's happening in one station and in one part of Antarctica. Those science endeavours are across nations, and for us, that long-term data set plays a role in some of those foundation data sets that are used globally. And last, Council of Managers of National Antarctic Programs. COMNAP was set up in 1988. It was set up with the intent of promoting best practice in the management and support of scientific endeavours. We have an annual meeting. It's a great sharing of information, best practice, methodologies. There are a number of special interest groups, and those special interest groups are really useful to push ahead some of the innovative and different ways of doing things. And it's a really great gathering of like-mindeds to share ideas, things that have gone really well and things that haven't gone so well. So certainly we like to work really closely with COMNAP and understand the connections with other nations, both in terms of specialist advice and also in terms of technical sharing. So being a really small nation with a very small presence on ice, we are always working really closely with those that particularly come through the gateway. That gives us the ability to share logistics between continents, but it also gives us the ability to share logistics on ice. So we value and work hard to enhance those relationships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And for folks in the audience who might not be familiar with COMNAP as an acronym, it's the Council of Managers of National Antarctic Programs. And it consists of representation of the manager of each Antarctic program, and then many others join in from the programs with their various expertise, as Sarah mentioned. Okay, so New Zealand provides one very important gateway to Antarctica, but sitting next to me, Dr. Marcelo Lopez-Cartes, he is sitting in another very important gateway. So a few words of introduction of yourself, and then we'll hear from you.
Oh, thank you very much, and especially to Wilson Center for the invitation and the opportunity to meet you again after many years. Have to mention you were president of COMNAP, the Council of Managers of Antarctic Programs, and she made a great job. But especially, Kili left a very good imagine about the relationship between countries and in their role in the Polar Program, and how I remember until today that one of your first activities was visiting our Latin American Congress in Chile. So that was a very good signal, and also one of the tipping points of the relationship that we have as a program. So after this, I become the director of the Chilean Antarctic Institute, and until today, 6 years. And we are trying to promote a big change in our perception about the role of Antarctica for a country as Chile, one of the closest country together with Argentina to Antarctica and directly under the influx of Antarctica. Here is my presentation. May I use this other place to?
I think so. Yes.
Yep.
Please feel free.
With this one? Or? Okay. So I had a short presentation. I will try to do it quickly. You probably remember this slide from yesterday. I put it there. But the idea is that 30 years ago, we started to be convinced about the impact of Antarctica around the world. Have prepared another presentation 2 weeks ago showing how these ground papers were produced 30 years ago, demonstrating that very distant places around the world were impacted, especially by the interaction of the ocean and the atmosphere. But this is an adaptation of a recently published paper showing the results of the horizon scan, and probably you have heard about these atmospheric cells that are showing these cells that are moving and connecting distant places of the peninsula, especially from the latitude of Margaret Bay inside the Antarctic Circle, the center part of South America, but especially the center part of Chile, and the next one connecting with the Ecuadorian area where the major part of the El Niño event happened. We just discovered in 2015, after giant floods, that the impact of the anticyclones and the activity of the ocean and the atmosphere in the northern part of the peninsula had an impact in the center part of Chile in real time. After the events of 2015 on a centennial scale, 4 days later, we have received these giant floods in the desert of Atacama, the driest place in the world. Also, during this decade, were published this article in Nature, connecting the ozone layer and the massive fires in Australia, Queensland especially, and the center part of Chile. I don't want to make the explanation here because it's very complicated, but there is a relationship that is very strong, and of course, the international collaboration have produced that the ozone layer is recovering, but we still have enough gases for the following 50 years. So why we changed our view about the relationship of Antarctica and these classic sovereignty ideas in Chile to one very important, crucial view that means we have to understand the behavior of Antarctica because it's impacting Chile in real time. 3 examples. The first one was exactly the floods in the northern part of Chile. Areas that were receiving an average of 1 millimeter precipitation per year have received in only a few hours 13 years of precipitation. And this have produced 9 passed away and the destruction of at least $100 million of infrastructure of roads and houses. Happened again 2021, but the difference, after the horizon scan, collaborating with a lot of countries, we have produced a model, and in 2021, we provide an early alert about the system. There was, again, these heat waves in the northern part of the peninsula. The atmospheric rivers, a new concept for us, moved to the north and have produced this precipitation in the middle of the summer in 2021, and again in 2023. The frequency of these events is becoming higher and higher. And probably you have heard that Chile is in a severe drought since 15 years ago. So these events are reflecting that the centennial scale of the events is, of course, changing for a more frequency and a close relationship with Antarctica. The second events are the fires that I mentioned. And the third is the retreat of the glaciers of the Patagonian ice fields after the Antarctic and the Arctic and Greenland, the most massive ice, continental ice in the world. So that's the role of my institution, the Chilean Antarctic Institute. It's something, I say, strange in the structure of the institutes around the world, but depends of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Of course, Chile is a claiming country, so they put it because of the political importance of the science that we are conducting in Antarctica. But we are changing some views. Yeah, I mentioned one, compliance with the national Antarctic policy, research of high quality standards linked to strategic interests of the country. One is these extreme events. Participation and leadership in the Antarctic Treaty System and the subsidiary bodies as SCAR, the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, strengthen Punta Arenas as gateway to Antarctica, dissemination and valuation of Antarctic knowledge. 4 of these priorities were not under our list of priorities 10 years ago. Dissemination, valuation of Antarctica, that's we have a strong communication program, dissemination of science and the importance of Antarctica, and advice to the authorities in Chile about Antarctic matters. With this nice view of the eclipse in Union Glacier, why Antarctica is important for Chile? The international collaboration on the scientific committee and Antarctic research have been key to understand this importance, and especially the last polar year, integrating different areas of the knowledge, but especially trying to push the collaboration in order to avoid the duplication of the research, but also trying to reach higher results in terms of impact. Response of the national science in the framework of the national program, PROCIEN is the acronym of, in Spanish, of the science program, all under the administration of INACH. Only one institution in Chile is in charge of this. I will comment something about the emblematic projects quickly. I don't want to repeat that, it's quick. It's one of the most important regulators of Earth, Chile Power for Climate Modulator. Antarctica influences the productivity of our oceans. It is decisive in the construction of a landscape of Chile. We have a natural history closely connected with the evolution of Antarctica. A reservoir of unique biodiversity, and a place very sensitive in terms of the global change. In numbers, the last season, considered a normal season, has almost 500 people deployed in Antarctica. From them, 284 were Chilean researchers in the field, and 119 in the international collaboration. This is interesting. It's 1/5 of all the scientists that we conduct in Antarctica are from different Antarctic programs from around the world. So Escudero Station is becoming our main scientific station in Antarctica, but also a place for the gathering of different groups and sharing questions. We are conducting around 90 to 100 projects per year, and the other data is not relevant at the moment, but I can pass the, okay. We are aligned with the SCAR priorities on this, we also adopted the after horizon scan exercise that provided the 80 most important questions for the Antarctica in the following 25 years. And we put it as priorities in our program. So when you apply for money in Chile, you can give extra points to your application if you are aligned with these questions. Also, during the last 10 years, we started an ambitious program of big projects. For us to have $1 million dedicated to only one project per year in a scope of 10 years, 5 to 10 years, is of course one priority program. And we have at the moment two. One is the program called IDEAL. IDEAL is devoted to the understanding of the Southern Ocean and the interaction with the southern part of Chile. And the second one started 2 years ago, Millennium Base, or BASE, that is studying biodiversity and resilience of the Antarctic ecosystems. The other dimension of the activities that we are trying to push to make better the collaboration and transform also Magallanes, Punta Arenas City, but also Port Williams, that is starting to be more relevant in Antarctic activities, is the International Antarctic Center. It was frozen for almost 1 year because of the budget previous to pandemic doesn't apply after the pandemic. Probably you know the phenomena that happened around the world with the cost of materials. But now, this month, in October, will be relaunched. This is a huge building, 32,000 square meters, with museums, laboratories of paleontology, ice, atmosphere, and oceans, so the physical dimension of climate change, ecology and evolution, multipurpose for expanding areas or new emergent areas, and biotechnology. Together with the launch of the International Antarctic Center in Punta Arenas, this sensor network has the idea to install new 21 automatic stations in Antarctica connected in real time with a brain. It's open access data. The metadata will be available in our web page. We have a beta today with 10 stations transmitting from Antarctica. The idea is to have 21 in a gradient of 2,000 kilometers long from Union Glacier to Elephant Island. The idea is start to provide a better understanding of the phenomena that are happening in Antarctica and how they can affect Chile in real time. The other one is, I'm really happy to hear about the project of the icebreaker recently. This is a little bit cheaper, but constructed in Chile. It's the first icebreaker constructed in Latin America, actually. And it's a big, ambitious program. It's in the water at the moment. Probably next year will be starting operations in Antarctica. It's an icebreaker with science capabilities, the first icebreaker that Chile has with laboratories, with the most modern implementation and equipment for conduct science of high level. The idea is to reach an area that is in the Bellinghausen and Weddell Sea that we never have conducted regular expeditions, and it's the area of 600 kilometers to the south of the Antarctic Circle. And finally, we have finally approved the plans for the renewal of one of the stations that is inside the Antarctic Circle, Margaret Bay. It's a Carvajal station, from the Air Force will be transpassed to INACH and will be an station operated by INACH, but together with a joint of the rest of the operators from the Air Force, Navy, and Army of Chile, and will be completely devoted to the studies of biodiversity, but especially climate change. It's an area that is key for the understanding of these patterns that I've shown before. And finally, I was talking about SCAR. The Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research has 46 country members and has every 2 years a big meeting. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, the last 6 years were in telematic way, but the next one will be in Chile, second time in Latin America, will be in Pucón. If you can see the news today, there's a big eruption in one volcano beside Pucón. And as I mentioned in a meeting the last week, probably most of the Antarctic scientists will be find great the opportunity to have fireworks, natural fireworks around our conference. So it's a very secure area, will be ready for the meeting, but also offers the space to the international collaboration. This is a very good opportunity for young researchers and especially for our gender priorities that is something transversal that is influencing the Antarctic Treaty, but also all our Latin American programs. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcelo. And now, thanks to both of our gateway cities and well-established scientific partners. I had everybody at this table on speed dial when I was at NSF. But now we will turn and look to David Hick to talk to us a little bit about Canada's thoughts about Antarctica. I just want to say that Canada has long had people involved in Antarctic oceanography, among other things, but hasn't had a station in Antarctica. So I think David's going to give us some really good insights into some of the things we were hearing about earlier in this conference, concerns about, too much of a human footprint and how we might get creative about expanding science, but not at the expense of Antarctica.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you to the Wilson Center for the opportunity to be here. It's a bit unusual from a Canadian perspective to be having a really in-depth discussion about the Antarctic, in part because you're absolutely correct. We don't have a station. We don't have flagged, typically have not had flagged expeditions. And that said, there's still an awful lot of research activity that's supported by the Canadian research community. So in my role as the Chief Scientist and Executive Director of Programs at Polar Knowledge Canada, we're looking at how we can expand and our own research activities, but also support the international community through partnerships and collaboration. And the title of this session, or the conference on rules-based order and global challenges, really sums up Canada's approach to the Antarctic region. Maybe I'll just start by saying a few words about Polar Knowledge Canada, because it's a fairly new federal agency that was created through legislation in 2015. And we have sort of a number of responsibilities, and the first is to operate the new Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Cambridge Bay in Nunavut. So that's the new Canadian flagship research station, and that's open for partnership from researchers from other countries already. So in the Arctic sense, we have a lot of interest and experience in working with other countries. We also conduct and fund research across northern Canada, focused in 3 primary areas around ecosystems and climate change. We have a large One Health program, and we do a lot of work on clean energy and cold climate technologies, all of which have relevance in an Antarctic context too. And then finally, we're the point of contact for Canada's circumpolar cooperation in science and research in both the Arctic and the Antarctic.
So Canadian Antarctic science is conducted by numerous researchers that are based at universities and a number of federal government departments. And those scientific activities are comprised of a mix of field-based and remote observations. And those are combined with a strong modeling and laboratory component in some cases as well. But the key point, I think, is that Canadian researchers partner with other nations to gain access to Antarctica, and that includes the United States and New Zealand and Chile. But it's absolutely essential for our programs and our researchers to have those partnerships. But at the same time, we continue to invest in research infrastructure that supports larger international research priorities. And just for example, I think some of our satellite missions, RADARSat-1, RADARSat-2, SciSat, and some early planning for future missions, I think are good examples of the types of data and information that Canadians are committed to provide for the international community that are relevant to the Antarctic. Canada is also a full member of SCAR, the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, that Marcelo was mentioning, and COMNAP, and we're pursuing full consultative party status in the Antarctic Treaty. So researchers conduct activities in many regions of the continent and the Southern Ocean, and in many fields of study. We're currently in the process of developing a new Canadian Antarctic Research Program framework that will provide core funding for Canadian Antarctic activities and strengthen international partnerships and collaborations, either formally or informally. And the priorities of our Antarctic research program really do support the SCAR Horizon Scan goals. We keep those in mind, as well as having the potential to contribute to international needs through the CEP, through CAMLR, through COMNAP. And those areas allow us to partner with many other national Antarctic programs, whether we're interested in the fate and state of the Antarctic sea ice and global sea level rise, Antarctica and the global climate system, using Antarctica as a platform for observing space weather and the universe. And we have a great interest in anthropogenic influences on Antarctic environments and mitigation through conservation or innovative cold regions technologies. These are all things that we have a lot of expertise and experience with in an Arctic context, and certainly look to how that could provide value to our partners and collaborators in the Antarctic. But the key is partnership and collaboration with national Antarctic programs and working closely with gateways to have access. And I think it's important to look ahead to opportunities in the next few years, in particular some of the early planning that's underway for the International Polar Year that's proposed for 2032-33. And Canada and the United States and many other countries work closely together in the early days of planning for IPY and providing the new resources that allowed us to be imaginative in terms of big science programs, infrastructure, logistics, and committing to long-term observations that help us understand the changes that are taking place in the polar regions. And we're really starting to think about what opportunities exist for Canada, but for the larger global community that could be linked to the ramp up to IPY and the rationale and vision for the International Polar Year itself. So I just wanted to close with that, because I think many of the things that we'd like to do in the Antarctic require careful planning, and there's a lead time that's needed for that. There's a lot of reinvestment that other countries are making in Antarctic facilities right now. And for a country that would like to continue to be active in the Antarctic research and to increase our contributions to Antarctic research, but not have a station and not necessarily have the traditional type of national expedition programs, we want to look at how we can best partner with other countries to do that. So thank you, Kelly. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, David. As you've heard, we have collaborated quite successfully with with everyone at this table and many others. And you mentioned International Polar Year. The last one was 2007 and 2008. And it was highly successful. Over 60 nations and many projects were launched in that time frame. And Scott Borg, who's right behind me here, was at the helm for the Antarctic Science Program at NSF for much of that period. He also has direct experience in running the logistics side of the house there, among other great experience at NSF. So, Scott, we'd like to hear something from you and your perspectives from the U.S.
Sure, thanks. Thanks to the Wilson Center and Kelly and Rebecca for thinking of me and inviting me in. It's despite the short notice, I think I might have something to contribute. So most of my time at NSF, nearly 30 years, was the lion's share of that time I was head of Antarctic Sciences. And I've seen a lot of changes over the years, and so I'm trying to draw on those observations for my comments today, with a particular focus on partnerships and relationships. Shortly after I went to NSF, I came across a copy of a little newspaper that used to be published at McMurdo Station. It was called the McMurdo Times or something like that, or maybe it was the Sun Times. Anyway, there was an interview with the person who was then in the role of head of Antarctic Sciences, the job that I spent most of my time at. And in those days, it was called the chief scientist, and there was a little blurb, a little caption under a picture of this fellow that basically said, well, my job is to explain to the scientists what they can't do because of logistics. And I say that because there's been a huge amount of change over the years. That was that cartoon or that publication was from the 60s sometime, perhaps mid to late 60s. And it represented a time when Antarctic programs around the world were still very much in sort of an expeditionary mode, and there were a lot of constraints on logistics, and so people did the best they could with observations, but it was driven a lot by the constraints of what can be done or what could be done at the time. A lot has changed, and what I experienced is that there were a tremendous amount of opportunities, but it depended on communication between programs and communication between scientists. So there's tremendous emphasis, I think, that needs to be placed on looking for venues for scientific discussions about how to address the various complex problems, and they range from, as have been mentioned already, they range from astrophysics and the origin of the universe to biological adaptation to the extreme environment, and as we all know, the Antarctic is connected to the rest of the world. It's nearly 10% of the continental crust of the Earth, and closer to 9%, but that's more or less 10%. And with the Southern Ocean, it's a tremendous heat engine, or cold engine, if you want to look at it the other way. But it's a tremendous engine that redistributes energy around the world. And we really need to, we can benefit society, not just the taxpayers in each of our own countries, but we can benefit society generally if we understand these things better, in all areas of science. And so what I think I was able to witness, or was privileged to witness, is a change where, with increased communication, some of it, in the early days, there was a lot of communication in SCAR, but a lot of it was exchanging information about what people had done. And it has evolved over the years, in my view, to be also a venue of talking about what can be done in the future. If people, scientists, as well as the national program managers, whether it's on the science side or the logistics side, put their heads together and not say, well, what can we do? or not say, well, what can we do under constrained logistics, but what can we do how can we solve the logistical problems, the access problems, the power problems, if you will, to support remote instrumentation? How can we solve these problems so that we can address the most important questions? And I think I was privileged to see a lot of activity in that, but it really depended on an inordinate amount of communication and communication between science managers in various national programs, communication between logistics managers, and obviously communication within the communities within each of those countries. And one has to, I think it's important to remember that one has to remember that there's lots of surprises. So when I first started working in the Antarctic program, I didn't quite realize that if we were, when we started to work with NOAA at a more extensive level, we realized that there was the opportunity to put in a satellite downlink station in McMurdo so that we could get satellite-based weather observations that could be rolled into forecast models with a reduction of data latency of nearly an hour, 45 minutes or so. And that was something that doesn't particularly benefit Antarctica, but it benefits society in general. It benefits any areas that are going to be impacted by a hurricane or similar storm system, if you can get those observations into models earlier. And so that's one of the, I think that was a particular success of the U.S. Antarctic program working with NOAA to get that sort of arrangement worked out. And my point in mentioning that is that in communicating with people, it's very useful if you can sort of keep a broad horizon in your field of view, and even sometimes have discussions that might stretch any preconceived notions about what might be possible, and find out, well, if we could get observations from one place or another, what could we do? And also fostering those discussions amongst the science communities in each of our countries and across the science communities from our various countries. Because in my experience, the projects, all the way from the Cape Roberts Scientific Drilling Project to the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory at South Pole, the 10-meter telescope at South Pole, the International Thwaites Glacier Initiative, all of those things have benefited tremendously from the different perspectives that our science communities bring. And so it's important to have communications and to be skeptical about whether barriers are really barriers or are they barriers of the mind. If you can get past the barriers of the mind and talk about possibilities with others, I think there's a tremendous number of opportunities that can be overcome. And I think that's exemplified by a number of the projects that are going on now, and that some of us have mentioned. So I think I'll stop there because I think we're getting real close to the end of the time for the panel, and I'm guessing, having come in late here, but I'm guessing there might be an opportunity for some questions.
I believe, Becca, we had till 2:15. Is that correct? Yeah, we started a few minutes late. Our previous speaker spoke a little longer than expected, but rightfully so. So I think we should have had some water down here for all the speakers, but so anyway, we've lost David momentarily, and Sarah, oh good, you're back. All right, so I want to say that we had, a fabulous scientific panel yesterday. I was very impressed with their ability and level of communication to this diverse audience. And I think they made it abundantly clear. It felt to me like I was 20 years ago, just at the inception of understanding the massive change underway in the Arctic, where the data sets were then long enough to see those changes there, and the magnitude of changes was such they were abundantly apparent. I think we got told yesterday in no uncertain terms that the sleeping giant of Antarctica is waking up, right? And we've mentioned some throughout this entire conference, the importance of sea level rise and impacts on our climate is at the forefront. So I really appreciate everybody touching on those kinds of projects that we've internationally collaborated on and wouldn't be possible at the scale and over the time frames needed for any single nation to do. So again, partnerships absolutely key there, and you've made that nicely clear. I mean, I like Scott's point that you really need to challenge yourself to not say no at first response to things, but to try and think as creatively as possible. So along those lines, you say SCAR is going to meet in Chile. What year is that going to be, that meeting?
2024.
Oh, coming right up then.
Yeah.
And David mentioned the International Polar Year when he was speaking. And so do you feel like there's a big opportunity there to maybe do a little bit of what Scott's saying and then to go beyond even what we did in IPY 2007 and 8, and particularly with the added urgency that we're hearing now?
One of the opportunities we have is that there were 50 years between IGY, the International Geophysical Year, and the last International Polar Year. And I wasn't involved in the first one, but in the last IPY, I think we had to relearn how to work together as a polar community because we hadn't done that in a long time. But now, 25 years later, we're planning for the next IPY in 32, 33. A lot of that collective memory of our experience during the last IPY still exists. And I think it'll make it easier for us to have a very clear vision of what we'd like to accomplish. And so I'm quite optimistic. And that early planning is starting now, 10 years in advance, and I think that'll serve us well in another polar year. And I think there needs to be a very strong Antarctic focus, because the changes that are taking place in the southern hemisphere right now are very dramatic.
Right. So Sarah, do you have excitement in New Zealand over a new IPY, or are you talking about that?
Yeah, there are conversations already about another IPY. We think that it will bring great focus to Antarctic science. There's already a good foundation of lots of different nations and lots of different entities working together. So we think it's a great opportunity to really focus on Antarctic science, focus on funding Antarctic science for us. And we're really looking forward to it. I think it's a great opportunity. We need to grab it with both hands and run with it.
So I want to say that, Scott mentioned certain things about Antarctica being critical to our situational awareness. No, everybody's actually touched on this, our situational awareness globally. And we know that just observations in Antarctica and continuation of them are essential going forward. And I want to say in particular nod to the frustration the U.S. community has had, and I'm sure it's played out elsewhere as well, in the delays that COVID brought on, and supply chain issues, and the difficulties with those two challenges when you're at the same time needing to reinvest in infrastructure and so forth. And the frustration is keen. Science never sleeps, right? So I think it's important to understand that we need to think creatively, as Scott has mentioned here, going forward. And partnerships and relationships will remain absolutely essential in Antarctica. So I want to thank our panelists for your astute observations.
Okay. The placards are coming. So, last but not least, can I ask the panelists to come and onto the stage? The time is now. So, the final panel, we've reached that point, but it's a special topic and a special group of people. So we're going to talk about marine conservation, from whales to krill, conservation MPAs, and the environment. So a pretty broad area of discussion. I have found we've talked about many different topics during these couple of days, from geopolitics to science, and I think that marine conservation has been, among all of these topics, one of the most important areas of concern for U.S. policy. So it's good to end that way today. The Southern Ocean is a huge place, a place of tremendous biodiversity. The fishery is managed by CAMLR, the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, which you've heard about a great deal in the last couple of days. And the marine protected areas are negotiated there and managed there. There are key issues related to the abundance of krill, and we'll hear about that today as well. Also issues about the take of toothfish, which we see at restaurants here in DC and throughout the US as Chilean sea bass. So we need to consider the current status of large-scale marine protected areas, including the existing Ross Sea MPA, which was a major initiative of the United States and New Zealand. Plus, we need to think about whether and how new MPAs can be created and the status of the 3 existing major proposals. So to deal with, this is it's a huge area of discussion, but we have some terrific people here to talk about this, some folks I know quite well. We have Nikki Bransom from Pew's Protecting Antarctica's Southern Ocean Project. She's also the NGO advisor on the U.S. delegation to CAMLR. We have Mia Kim, my colleague on the CAMLR delegation for many years. She's from the National Marine Fisheries Service of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and she's been the NIMS policy lead for the U.S. delegation in the Commission, and budgetary concerns, we'll see whether she can get to Hobart in a few weeks to attend CAMLR. Andrea Capurro is the chief of program staff of the Ocean Foundation and acts as an advisor for marine protected areas at Agenda Antarctica. She played a key role on the Argentine team that led to the proposal for a marine protected area in the West Antarctic Peninsula. And John Weller is it says here, internationally acclaimed author, photographer, and filmmaker, which, and he's also, this is all true, but he's also my favorite Antarctic photographer. And a wonderful guy. So we have all of these folks here, and so I think we'll begin with Nikki. So she'll talk about the importance of krill in the Southern Ocean and give us some background on the 30 by 30 campaign and how it relates to the Southern Ocean. So, Nikki, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Evan. And I have a few slides to show with this.
You come last. Okay.
Well, thank you to Evan and Becca for including the Pew Bertorelli program on this distinguished panel. So as Evan said, I'll be talking about krill and then reviewing the recent global commitments for ocean protection and how this relates to the Antarctic. So we started to hear from Dr. Lynch yesterday about krill, but I'd like to reintroduce this character. So krill are about the size of an adult human pinky finger, and they're larger than most commonly sold shrimp species that you might find in the grocery store. They're thought to comprise the largest biomass of any animal species on Earth after humans at this stage. And one cool fact about krill is that they can glow, and experts believe that this is to help them school and or avoid predators. So as we've also heard, krill are critical as a food source for the Antarctic. Most of the animals in the Antarctic eat krill, and krill provides 96% of the caloric needs for seabirds and mammals in the Antarctic Peninsula. And krill also play a really important role in the Southern Ocean's biological carbon sink. So after feeding on algae that has absorbed carbon dioxide at the sea surface, krill migrate down in these massive swarms to depths, transforming large amounts of carbon to the ocean depths. So in this way, Antarctic krill can actually store the carbon equivalent of 35 million cars each year in the deep ocean. So CAMLAR, as Evan introduced, was established in 1982 in response to the growth of the krill fleet in the region. And at the time, it was actually known as the Krill Convention. And what's really unique about CAMLAR and how it was ahead of its time was that the convention sets conservation as the primary objective, as the objective. So fishing is allowed so long as it doesn't have negative long-term impacts on the fish species or the species that depend on those fish species. And so the largest fishery these days in CAMLAR is for krill by catch size. And the products, luxury products that are derived from krill include omega-3 oil supplements for human use, and for animals, feed, including for farmed fish. So who's fishing for krill? Well, the first peak was caused by the Soviet Union in the 70s and 80s, and this continued until the collapse of the USSR. And in the last 2 decades, other countries have emerged, and this has been led by Norway in recent years. So most recent catch of krill fishers in the last 5 years, the leaders were Norway, China, Korea, Ukraine, and Chile. And it's interesting if you look at China during the last few years, during the COVID period, they actually doubled their krill catch. And this is most likely related to their bringing online of some new cutting-edge continuous trawling technology that they learned from the Norwegians. So krill are adapted to the Southern Ocean's cold waters, and they totally depend on sea ice to complete their life cycle. And as we've heard yesterday about climate change, things aren't going great in the Antarctic. And so for krill, this is impacting them in a number of ways, but some of the most dramatic impacts are that krill are already shifting their center of distribution south, and they've shifted south by about 275 miles already. And researchers expect that this southern shift will continue as climate continues to warm. And scientists also predict that ocean acidification could cause the collapse of krill populations by the year 2300. So I'd like to ask whether management is currently effective in protecting krill and their predators as required by the CAMLAR Convention. So when the fishery first started, fishing was spread all around the Antarctic continent. However, in recent years, all of the krill fishing has been centered around the Antarctic Peninsula and Scotia Sea region. And so fishing is now even more concentrated in this area. And I would argue that this is one of the biggest problems facing the krill fishery. So industry likes to say that the fishery is sustainable because they're catching only 1% of the krill population. However, this is misleading because that total is targeting very small nearshore areas, while a large part of the krill population exists offshore. So to illustrate this, here are catch data from sub-area 48-1. This is the area right off of the Antarctic Peninsula. And within this region in recent years, these two smaller subunits in yellow and green, I hope you all can see colors, but they're the Bransfield Strait East and West. They've been getting 74% of the catch in this area. However, this accounts for only 8% of this area by surface area. So as you can see, there's a huge concentration of this catch coming from very small areas. And this is actually more extreme in other areas where the fishery operates. So if you look here at the South Orkney Islands, 96% of the catch is coming from 1.9% of the region. And if you look at South Georgia, 95% of the catch is coming from only 5.6% of the region. So what does this mean for the predators? Well, research that was published in 2020 has shown that krill fishing, even at current levels, and there are interests in expanding the fishery, are combined with climate change is already having a negative impact on predators, including penguins. And some of this research was led by Dr. George Waters and the NOAA Fisheries Antarctic Ecosystem Research Division. And then this was followed up by Lucas Kruger and colleagues at ENOCH, or the Chilean Antarctic Institute. So this research really provides the first empirical proof that current Kamlar krill fishing measures are allowing negative long-term impacts on the ecosystem, contrary to the objective of the convention. So what solutions exist? What can Kamlar do about this? So Kamlar is working to develop a new ecosystem-based management strategy that would spread the catch out in space and time to protect predators. And that's based on a work plan that Kamlar agreed to in 2019, a scientific work plan that's being implemented by its scientists. So the first part of that program is to update krill biomass estimates using acoustic surveys. And then that is followed by a krill stock assessment, which essentially shows how much krill can be fished in order to maintain a robust krill population. And then finally, the part that makes it ecosystem-based is a risk assessment, also known as a spatial overlap analysis. And this is a tool that Kamlar scientists have decided to use, and this allows them to figure out ways to spread the catch out in space and time to help protect the predators. The other solution that Kamlar is considering and implementing are marine protected areas. So MPAs in general can produce increased biodiversity and species densities, and then by minimizing other threats, they can help the ecosystem build resilience to climate change. They can also protect economic opportunities, including tourism, and they're powerful tools that can help actually support healthy fisheries through the spillover effect. So scientists say that we need to protect 30% of the global ocean by 2030, and recently countries have also agreed with this under several international frameworks. So in December of 2022, global leaders reached an agreement under the new Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework under the Convention on Biological Diversity, which includes a commitment to protect 30% of the global ocean by 2030. And most recently, UN member countries finalized the High Seas Treaty Agreement that we've heard about, which includes 2/3 of the global ocean. And this was signed by 81 countries last week. So noting the value of MPAs, Kamlar in 2011 made a commitment to create a network, and they also created a framework to create a network of MPAs. Currently, there are 3 proposed MPAs under consideration for by Kamlar, and a fourth one the Wet LC proposal is expected to be negotiated at the meeting in a few weeks. And so I include this map from the MPA Atlas because it shows the Kamlar MPAs and proposals in the global context. And you can really just see how large they are compared to everything else. And so if you really want to get to 30 by 30, you have to include the Southern Ocean. It's really the best opportunity. And the existing MPAs as well as the proposed MPAs could protect over 2.4% of the global ocean. So finally, I'll just leave you with this map that shows the existing and proposed MPAs in the Southern Ocean, both in the Kamlar waters in the convention area south of 60 degrees, and then those in the waters managed by individual countries north of 60 degrees. Thanks.
Nikki, thank you very much indeed. I think the point you make about 30 by 30 and the need for Antarctic MPAs is a crucial one. That kind of international goal really can't be accomplished without moving forward in the Southern Ocean. And also to note that with respect to handling krill at Kamlar, like every decision is all taken by consensus, which makes it that much more difficult to move forward on things, but a lot of efforts are going on there now. So next, I'd like to ask Mia Kim. She's going to talk about the Camelar MPA proposals and the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area.
And I have some slides. I need it lower. Thank you, Evan, and to the Wilson Center for having me here. I'm actually filling in for Dr. George Waters, who couldn't make it in person to this meeting, and he provided a couple of slides. So I think that might mean I have to use the word gnarly at some point, but I'm not sure if I'll fit it in. Just for some background, and this is a nice segue from Nikki's presentation. Camelar has been working on MPAs in the Southern Ocean for decades. Camelar decided long ago that MPAs were an appropriate tool to achieve its singular conservation objective, and it agreed years ago to develop a representative system of MPAs across its entire convention area. The first MPA was the South Orkney Islands Southern Shelf MPA, adopted in 2009, and sometime thereafter, in 2011, it adopted a framework for establishing MPAs in Camelar. And that framework describes the objectives and the requirements that should be going into the conservation measures that codify those MPAs. So my first slide here is for the Ross Sea region MPA. The boundaries you see in black, and the colors that you see represent a variety of environmental features and species that form the basis for where the MPA boundaries would go. And some of these, I'm not going to tell you which colors are which because I actually don't know, but they represent tropically dominant pelagic prey species, large-scale ecosystem processes, vulnerable marine ecosystems, and species like Adelie and emperor penguins, Weddell seals, and type C killer whales. So this was first proposed in 2012. Actually, there were two separate proposals, and that was also my first meeting. The Commission asked that the United States and the New Zealand combine their proposals. So I remember working in the evenings and on the weekends with Evan and other colleagues to combine them, and we presented it to the Commission the following week. However, there was no consensus on that proposal. So Camelar, along with its scientific committee, held a special meeting in 2013 in Bremerhaven, Germany. And this was discussed for many, many hours, this proposal as well as the East Antarctic proposal, which I'll get to in a moment. And following that discussion, there was substantial revisions to both the proposals. But the conversation was far from over. We had members who wanted more information on the threats to marine living resources in the Ross Sea, and more scientific justification for the MPA. There were several discussions about what would be allowed or not allowed as far as activities go within the MPA. Some of the last items negotiated were the catches of toothfish in the special research zone. That was of interest to Russia and others. And then the addition of the krill research zone, that's the KRZ over to the left, that helped obtain China's support. The last point of negotiation was the period of designation with an outcome of 35 years, so that will be in 2052. Camelar at that point will need to decide if it will amend or renew this MPA or if it will come up with a new one for the Ross Sea. So as Evan mentioned, this was a major initiative of the United States, and it was a historic moment when this MPA was adopted. It's the largest high seas MPA in the world and protects an area of unequal biological productivity in the Antarctic. It also set up scientific reference areas to study climate change and fishing impacts, and there was already a robust foundation of knowledge to carry that work out. So I will be speaking to the three MPAs proposals that are under consideration that Nikki mentioned. So I think I'll jump to the next one. And these proposals have been designed using a similar process as the Ross Sea. First, you articulate the objectives for the MPA, then you map data layers that link to those objectives, and then draw boundaries and specify management provisions whereby you can achieve the objectives. Now, all of the various MPA proposals try to achieve slightly different objectives, and that's okay because we've got the distribution of animals and habitats are different, the effects of climate change are different, the amount of fishing going on is different in the various regions of Antarctica. But what they all do is protect representative examples of marine ecosystems, biodiversity, and habitat at the appropriate scale to maintain their integrity over the long term. They establish scientific reference areas for monitoring natural variability and long-term change, and you can monitor effects of harvesting of resources as well as other human impacts on the ecosystems. Now, they also protect areas to maintain resilience or the ability for species to adapt to the effects of climate change, which has been already mentioned a few times. So this slide is the proposal for the Western Antarctic Peninsula and South Scotia Arc. This is a proposal from Argentina and Chile. But the United States, we've contributed quite a bit of science and data sets which underpin this proposal. So it includes two areas, the General Protection Zone, which is a dark gray, and the krill fishery zone, which is the light gray. And what I'll also point out is that you see this, maybe I can't use the pointer, but you see there's a little dashed area on the northwest quadrant. That is South Orkney Islands Southern Shelf MPA. So in this MPA, fishing is prohibited except for certain kinds of research fishing activities for krill. In the General Protection Zone, you've got an additional requirement for any research fishing that a research plan for review is provided to the scientific committee and commission, and that they carry 2 scientific observers on board. Transshipment is also prohibited in the General Protection Zone. Now, in the krill zones, you've got fishing that may be conducted, but they must carry at least an observer appointed under the CAMLR scheme of international scientific observation, and fishing on vulnerable marine ecosystems is prohibited. Next, I'll move to the proposal for the East Antarctic, and this is a proposal that was first proposed in 2012, like the Ross Sea, and it includes 3 areas. We've got the Mac-Robertson, Dragulski, and D'Urville Sea Mertz. So research fishing is allowed in these zones that consistent with there's a conservation measure under CAMLR regulating scientific research. Krill fishing is prohibited in the D'Urville Sea Mertz zone. That's over to the right. And then the green areas that you see there, those are areas where directed fishing is also prohibited. And these reflect areas that are shallower, or they're the 550-meter contour and landward are areas that are where fishing cannot occur. And these might be deeper than 550 meters in some places. We have the dumping and discharge of waste or other matter being prohibited, and transshipment also being prohibited. The final proposal I'll show you is the Weddell Sea MPA proposal for phase 1. And this includes, I should first say that this is a proposal like the East Antarctic proposal. It's got a number of co-sponsors now, and the United States is one of them. So it's Australia, the European Union and its member states, India, New Zealand, Norway, Korea, Ukraine, United Kingdom, and Uruguay. It demonstrates the support that we have within CAMLR for MPAs. So this MPA has a general protection zone, special protection zone, and fisheries research zone. And these are shown, so the the general protection zone is a light blue. The special protection zone is the bright blue, and the periwinkle color there is the fisheries research zone. So in the GPZ, general protection zone, directed fishing is prohibited, but the research fishing of certain types can occur. And then in the special protection zone, we've got all fishing prohibited. And in the fisheries research zone, we have directed fishing for toothfish can be permitted between depths, contour depths of 550 and 2,100 meters. And also in this MPA proposal, discharge of untreated sewage and gray water would be prohibited, and transshipment would be prohibited as well. And there's a few other, of course, management measures towards these proposals. And there's also, in each of these proposals, there's review provisions. So every 5 years, there will be a look at all of the activities, the research activities that are taking place. And every 10 years, there would be a review of the MPAs to see whether it is effective in achieving its objectives. My last slide is a map of the convention area, a bit simpler than what Nikki had, but this again shows the various MPAs existing and proposed. And perhaps you recognize by the colors, but the orange is the Ross Sea Region MPA. You've got the light green, which is I guess it's a green, South Orkney Island Southern Shelf MPA. The dark gray is the we call the D1 MPA. The dark green is the Weddell Sea Phase 1 MPA. And then you'll see the other blue here next to the green. That's the Phase 2 MPA that is going to be discussed at the upcoming meeting. So this, as I mentioned, MPAs are supported by a majority of CAMLR members. We do have China and Russia who are blocking the establishment of the proposed MPAs. Now, for the United States, we support these proposals, and we'll continue to work with other members to establish the MPAs to preserve the relatively unspoiled environment of Antarctica and to conserve diversity, biodiversity, and provide climate refugia. Thank you.
Mia, thank you so much. So we have the Ross Sea MPA, which is a huge thing. It's twice the size of the state of Texas. And we have 3 proposals which are the main focus of diplomacy in the Southern Ocean at the moment, and will be taken up by CAMLR again in a few weeks. So next, Andrea. So Andrea Capurro will talk about the importance of Antarctic MPAs for the Southern Ocean as a whole, and also through the kind of science diplomacy lens. So Andrea.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ivan and the Wilson Center, for organizing such an important event. We have had remarkable presentations during these 2 days. I want to talk to you today about the importance of Antarctic marine protected areas, not only as conservation tools, but as instruments of science diplomacy. And I think the Antarctic offers a unique opportunity to explore this interaction because of its governance system that is based on consensus. We have all made commitments to protect the Antarctic environment and conserve its marine biodiversity through scientific cooperation. But Antarctica is also unique because it's been disproportionately affected by climate change. We have already heard about this. Carbon dioxide levels are higher than ever, and global temperatures continue to rise. And there's a whole set of complex factors that are driving us to tipping points at unprecedented rates. Most importantly, changes to Antarctic processes are and will continue to have profound effects at local and global scales. Industrial fishing is one additional stressor to a marine environment that is already vulnerable and changing because of climate change. Climate predictions for the Antarctic are not looking good. But we have the tools and frameworks available to help protect Antarctica. Tools that are not new, that are widely used elsewhere, that are backed by science, and that have been agreed by consensus at CAMELAR. These tools are marine protected areas, or MPAs. So MPAs are tools designed to restore ocean health in a holistic way and in line with the precautionary and ecosystem approach. We can think of a network of Antarctic MPAs as sitting on 4 interconnected ecological pillars. Conservation, to safeguard biodiversity and protect key habitat processes and species. Resilience, to cope with environmental change, including climate change and uncertainty. Connectivity, to maintain the whole range of ecosystem functions throughout the Southern Ocean. And management, to reduce the cumulative impacts of additional stressors such as industrial fishing. But these pillars are taken to a different dimension in Antarctica when seen through a science diplomacy lens, and can serve as global examples for international cooperation. Conservation needs scientific cooperation to better inform decision-making. MPAs are hubs for international cooperation, where scientists get together to share knowledge, data, and resources that transcend political boundaries. Improving resilience is about shared challenges and threats that open dialogues between nations for coordinated efforts. Connectivity gets improved when multilateral negotiations bond people working across regions that are naturally connected and bridge conflicting positions. And a well-designed and managed MPA is inclusive of stakeholders' views, needs, and values. Because in Antarctica, we need everyone on board. We kicked off to a great start, not only by the 2 MPAs that we already have in Antarctica or in the Southern Ocean, but also because we have dedicated a huge amount of time, effort, and resources into developing the 3 additional proposals. Despite our collective efforts, we're lagging very behind our own commitments. It took more than 10 years of scientific effort and 5 years of dedicated diplomatic negotiations to get the Rossy region MPA, and that even included direct phone calls between presidents. At this pace, we all lose. The science is clear. What we need now is all hands on deck to traction political will to get the 3 MPAs adopted. And we also need to find a mechanism in which we can hold nations accountable to their own international commitments and legally binding instruments. I'm really looking forward to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Andrea, thank you very much. And so now we have John Weller, and he's going to talk about the Ross Sea, the negotiation of the MPA from his perspective, and building international collaboration.
Excellent.
John, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right. Well, everybody else kind of said it. Oh, didn't pop up on the first slide. There we go. Everybody else kind of told the story, but I'm going to tell it again because I think it's really important to drive home not just what happened in the Ross Sea, but what we were
there to protect. And to start this story, I have to show you this photograph. And I have to tell you that I've been a photographer for 25 years, though that is hard for me to actually say with because it just sounds terrible. But I've taken about 4 million images, thousands of hours of film, and this is the most important photograph that I've ever collected. And to tell you the story of this photograph, of course, I have to take you to the Ross Sea. If anybody here doesn't know it yet, it's this big embayment of the Southern Ocean. It's about 3,500 miles south of New Zealand. And to get there, of course, as we heard this morning, unless you get onto an icebreaker, or unless you get onto a C-130 and fly down to McMurdo, you have to cross the Southern Ocean. And if anybody has not done this, I wish that I could give you this experience of crossing the Southern Ocean. It is so absolutely powerful as the ship is fighting its way down over these 30-foot swells, smashing from swell to swell, sending these curtains of salt white spray into the air. The ship is tipping at up to 45 degrees in each direction, which means on the extremes of those worst rolls, you can actually walk on the walls as it's crossing down over these vast silver-black mountains of water. Until, after 5 days of indigestion and possibly worse, you get to a point where those waves calm down and you see this thin white line stretching across the entire southern horizon. And that, of course, is the edge of the ice. And as the ship crosses through, it leaves those towering waves behind, and you're confronted with this jigsaw puzzle, of floating ice. It just extends out to the edge of your imagination in every direction. And there's nothing else down there. There's no other topography down there except for these floating mountains of blue ice just sawing at the sky like jagged teeth. It is the most humbling and amazing extreme place that I have ever witnessed, that one could ever witness. But of course, all of this is just a backdrop, because what you're really there to see is the ecosystem. And I don't know if I think Nikki may have said this, but this is the richest ecosystem in the world by biomass, right? Most of that biomass is krill, and you have the minkies and the orcas. They follow this vast banquet of food down deep into the ice. They find the most improbably small breathing holes to pop up and take a breath as they're going down to hunt this bounty. As you go further down into the ice, you start to see, of course, the iconic penguins zooming past the edges of the ice, leaving these bridal veils of bubbles in the cerulean blue water. They explode out of the water and onto the ice. Of course, that's their danger zone where they might come in contact with a leopard seal. So they go down deep and they just pop out of the water like corks, leaving parts of their stories written in the snow all around you. Up in the skies, you see from time to time you'll catch sight of a snow petrel. They look improbably fragile in this environment, like pieces of origami that somebody's just tossed up into the wind. Now, I'm sure there's some biologists in the room, so you and most everybody, and if not everybody, has seen these guys, the emperors, and I'm sure you all know about their breeding physiology, their breeding story, where they have the eggs in the dead of winter. The males hold a single egg on their feet as they protect this precious package from temperatures up to 70 degrees below zero, down to 70 degrees below zero, in high winds throughout the winter, in the middle of the Antarctic winter. But I don't know if everybody knows, but they're also the deepest diving birds in the world. And they can actually hold their breath. They can go down for up to 30 minutes. They can reach depths of 600 meters. And when they do that, they actually slow their heart rate down to 6 beats a minute. Their resting heart rate is about 6 beats a minute, or 60 beats a minute. And right before a dive, you'll see them doing this. They start swinging their wings on the edge of the ice. And what they're doing is raising their heart rate up to 250 beats a minute to hypersaturate their body with oxygen. As soon as they hit the water, they're down to 60 beats a minute. And then over a course of a long dive, they can drop it down to 6 beats a minute. When they pop out of the water, they raise their heart rate right back up to 250 beats a minute to replace all that oxygen they've just lost. And in doing so, they experience the stresses of a human heart attack on each dive, with no ill effects. Now, of course, these are the birds that are potentially our first victim of climate change in Antarctica. And that's all just the view from above water. If you really want to see this ecosystem, well, in my case, since I had never done any diving, I had to train for 3 years to get ready to actually get under the ice. You have to suit up. You have to stare down this hole and somehow swallow your fear and suit up and drop through the hole under the ice. And once you do, all that fear, all that trepidation just disappears because you're confronted with this absolute palette of cyans and blues. The view under the ice, there's nothing like it, and it was the most incredible honor to be in this place. Now, when you drop down into that, through that ice, out of McMurdo, usually you're dropping down near a seal colony of Weddell seals. These are the southernmost mammals in the world. They can reach depths of up to 800 meters and stay down for 90 minutes. Absolute miracles of evolution. And they eat their way through the ice in the wintertime to keep their dive holes open through the dead of winter because they're the only mammal that stays in the Ross Sea all year long. They experience the pressure of a car crusher when they're down under the ice. And all of this it's a miracle of evolution, right? You're just being confronted again and again. Fish that make their own antifreeze, sea spiders the size of dinner plates, each creature just absolutely supremely adapted to living in this sea of ice. Now, I want to back up a little bit and talk to you. Peter told the story so eloquently this morning and probably used the same photograph, but talk to you about how I got involved in this as a desert photographer in Colorado. Why did I end up in the Ross Sea? And it turned out to be this fella, Dr. David Ainley. I had a high school friend who was working in Antarctica, and she would kind of blow back through town every 6 months, and she'd show up at like 9 o'clock at night and knock on the door unannounced and with a bottle of wine, and we'd have a catch-up before she was off to her next adventure. Well, this particular time in 2004, instead of a bottle of wine, she had this well-worn scientific paper that she had been leafing through, which she thrust into my hand. She said, "You need to read this right now." And it was very appropriately called Acquiring a Base Datum of Normality for Marine Ecosystem. And because of the title, it was so enticing, I had to read it right then. But it tells this incredible story, of course, about the Ross Sea. And in this paper, David contends that the Ross Sea was the last large intact marine ecosystem left on the planet. And at that time, I knew almost nothing about oceans, embarrassingly little about oceans. And to read this, that we were down to one last intact place, it absolutely blew my world apart, as did the rest of the paper, which identified the toothfish fishery as the most immediate threat to the Ross Sea. As you probably know, it's the largest predatory fish in the Southern Ocean, plays key critical roles in the ecosystem, both as a predator and as prey, and as we've heard, is sold as Chilean sea bass. Now, it supports the southernmost and most remote fishery on the planet, and catch levels were ramping up without really any knowledge about the toothfish that would support a sustainable fishery. At this point, nobody had ever found an egg. Nobody had ever found a larval fish. They didn't know where they bred. They didn't know when they bred. They didn't know how long they lived. None of this, well, except for that last part, which is not true. There was so little known about this fish. The only thing that really was known was that they start breeding in their late teens. They live into their 40s. And this was a threat to the ecosystem. So my world was completely turned upside down, and I called David after sitting on this for a couple weeks and not being able to sleep. I called David. I hunted him down in California. I went out and we had this very intense meeting where we committed to each other to pushing for marine protected area in the Ross Sea. Now, how to do that? Of course, all decisions come through CAMLR, as everybody here knows. We, at that time, had to convince 24 nations and the EU. And how are we going to do that? Starting off, in my case, was absolutely no information about the Antarctic and no information about oceans in general. Well, first off, David sent me home with an armful of reading, which I read all of and started to write perspectives and trying to get funding for myself to get down there. David went back to his incredible collaborators in the scientific community, and they started to produce this flood of science. I've never seen production like this, intellectual production like this. Just an incredible outpouring of science that looked at the importance of interactions within the ecosystem, the threats of climate change, the potential of this fishery to undermine this entire system. Now, that was amazing, but what we really needed was a consolidated paper, some sort of basis to form a marine protected area, and that's what we did in 2009. I found some funding through a woman from the UK, and we invited all of the Ross Sea scientists into the International Marine Conservation Congress in 2009. This kind of meeting had never happened before. Fish people went and talked to fish people, ice people went to talk to ice people. You know, all of these people were, all of these incredible scientists had never really gotten together to talk to each other about the area. And what came out of that was this incredible paper. It turned out to be the basis of the Ross Sea MPA proposal. And with that in hand, we went around and we started to look for scientific support. And over the course of the next year or so, we got over 1,000 signatures of support from scientists all over the world. And of course, the U.S. took on the battle in 2010, brought it to the floor of Kamilar. That was an incredible win. And that just absolutely inspired these scientists to keep on flooding out information about the importance of climate change, the potential impacts of climate change, the interconnections within the ecosystem, the threat of this fishery, and then, of course, how Kamilar might be failing to protect the Southern Ocean. Now, in the background, of course, there was and actually not just the background, but the foreground, there was this incredible diplomatic pressure that was being brought by Evan and his team and the New Zealand team. There are plenty of stories that he shared with me that I cannot share with you, but you should ask him later. He does like bourbon, and so if you feed him some of that, he'll probably go wax poetic about all of these experiences.
Single malt whiskey is also
sorry. Yeah, single malt whiskey. Yep, and probably 12 to 18 years old. So there was this incredible diplomatic effort going on. There was this incredible scientific effort going on. And then, of course, my job was to try to bring this to the public. Now, I'd never done anything like this before, of course, so I started calling everybody I knew. I'd walk around my backyard with my cell phone trying to figure out who's the next person I should call for this next little piece of this project. And I wore tracks in my backyard, made thousands and thousands of phone calls, and finally happened upon this fellow who you've already heard from, this incredible videographer from New Zealand, Peter Young. As he said, I showed up on his doorstep pretty much in the same way Heidi showed up on mine, unannounced, knocked on his door, and we became best friends and compatriots. He took this on as his own and brought the Ross Sea story to the world. I also, of course, met this woman who you heard from on the first day. This is her with the toothfish. As you know, no doubt know, she became my wife, so you probably know how that conversation got started. And between the four of us, we formed this team, the Last Ocean team, trying to bring this story out to the public, out to the world. Now, I wish I had time to go through all of the people on this list, all the people and organizations on this list, but suffice to say, we had an incredible amount of support that we built, and each one of these organizations and people provided critical support at some point during the project. Now, by this time, I'd been down to the Ross Sea now 4 times, once underwater. Peter had come down with me for one of those trips and then followed the path of the toothfish across the country and across the world from the hook to the plate. And we had, hundreds of hours of film and hundreds of thousands of photographs, and what were we going to do with all this raw media? Well, the first thing I did was start publishing articles, published dozens of articles. Those spurred dozens more. Eventually, we had the pictures were published thousands of times, reached a global audience in the hundreds of millions. Peter brought his film around, as he said, all over the place. It's an incredible film. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. And winning awards and bringing this story further and further into the public view. I published a book, of course, and then was able to hand that specifically to diplomats and leaders of countries even to bring the story in that form to new audiences. And of course, we were able to speak. I would speak to elementary schools, and then the next day I'd be flying to DC to talk to Pew, and then eventually we got to even talk to the delegates of CAMLR themselves. And we started to get institutional partners, NGO partners, who we were able to give this media to them and let them do their magic, their lobbying within their own spheres, and bring this into an entirely different level. It was amazing to see this group of people grow, this effort grow throughout the 12 years that I worked on this project and lost all of my hair. Now, what we did in total is we took this obscure place at the bottom of the world and we brought it into the mainstream. And you know, by the end of it, people are actually thinking about the Ross Sea as the last ocean. And we put CAMLR on notice that not only were the scientific and diplomatic communities mobilized, but the public was watching as well. So now, since I usually give all my photographs to my wife, I now get to steal some stuff from her. And she gave me this graph to show you how this played out on the floor of CAMLR, all of this public diplomatic and scientific pressure. The UK gets the pole position because they started talking about MPAs very early on in 1996. And then, as you saw in 2010-11, the US took this on, brought it to CAMLR, and very quick, along with New Zealand, and those two countries were joined by Australia and Belgium very quickly. Now, over the next few over the next few years, I guess 2012, we had a whole tranche of countries that joined the proponents for this MPA, and at that time, the MPA looked something like that. Now, over the course of negotiations, there was a 60%, I think, 40% reduction of the MPA size, but in return, all but two countries came on board, and that's where we helped to recruit probably the most important person in this whole fight, who was John Kerry. Now, John Kerry, Evan was working directly under him, and at one point we were able to get him to come to an event with Pew and the Last Ocean, and he spoke about the Ross Sea, and he took this on as a personal legacy. Like, he wanted this to be part of his legacy. And this is another story that Evan shared with me that I can't share with you, but he was very, very responsible for bringing Obama into the mix, and through Obama, the Chinese joined in 2015. Again, in 2016, Kerry was working with Minister Lavrov and his counterparts in Russia, and in 2016, as you know, Russia came on board as well. So here is this, but we're back to this picture. This is a picture of the US and New Zealand delegations on October 28th, 2016, moments after the MPA was officially adopted. And what I want to communicate to you, what I have new to say to you that you haven't heard from other speakers, is something about what happened in that room. Because both Cassandra and I were delegates through ASOC to CAMLR in 2016. So we were both in the room when this happened. And it was a roller coaster, I'll tell you that. I mean, every day it looked like it wasn't going to happen. And it was the 11th hour, this incredible negotiating that Evan and Gillian Dempster and others helped to spearhead, that came due in the final moments before report adoption. And when they had that final head of delegation meeting and they let everybody back into the room, and the Russian chair sat down and he said, he held the gavel up, he banged it on the desk quite literally, and he said, we're done. It's an agreement. This room. Now you have to understand, I mean, Evan is a very lovable guy. He's like a big teddy bear. But in situ, he is an incredible diplomat, completely stoic, along with everybody else in that room. So you have this room of stoic diplomats, and it just erupted. People were laughing and cheering and crying. There were nations hugging other nations in this room. So what I want you to understand is that this wasn't just a win for Antarctica. This wasn't just a win for the global oceans, though it was both. This was a peace treaty that we got to witness. And, you know, as Andrea just said, you know, the chance to spearhead that type of peace in the Antarctic has the potential to radiate out into other spheres around the world. And that's what we desperately need. We desperately need collaboration and peace to have any kind of chance of facing the challenges that we're faced with right now. So when I'm depressed, I look back at these photographs and I think, you know what, we can do this. We've seen it happen before. And specifically in the Antarctic, this is the place where this happens. So my whole family at the time, I have a little boy here who wasn't born yet, but Adele, my parents, Cassandra, and I all got to celebrate with this weird penguin who was walking around. And I want you to understand that as one story ends, there are many others that are just beginning. So our fight needs to go on. Thank you very much. Cheers.
You can see why John has to go last from all of that. And it's so wonderful to see the kids up there actually smiling, looking at their dad. So that's pretty wonderful. Do we have any little time left? Okay, we have a little bit of time left. So thank you all for your presentations. One question that I have, it's really more for our NGO representatives here, and that is, this is a conference about U.S. policy in particular, and if you have, particular thoughts on what you would like the U.S. government to be focused on, not necessarily in the area you just talked about, but in terms of Southern Ocean marine conservation, what do you think the U.S. government should be? Obviously, I can't ask Mia this because she is the U.S. government and she'd just be recommending things to herself. But maybe if I could start with Nikki, what would you say to the U.S. government here and online?
Sure. Thanks, Evan. So wearing my hat, my NGO hat, I think the U.S. has, as you've just heard from John, the U.S. was key, right? I mean, with New Zealand, you should be so proud of what you achieved with the Ross Sea. Not only the largest marine protected area in the Southern Hemisphere, somebody mentioned, but the largest protected area on Earth. I mean, it's such an amazing accomplishment. But as Andrea mentioned, we have a lot of distance to go to get there. And these negotiations can be very challenging, but really, global cooperation, persistence, working with the, many member proponents of the different MPAs, just keep chugging. Obviously, we're in a very difficult global dynamic right now, even outside of ChemLAR, but just maintaining that persistence and looking for every opportunity to continue to have those dialogues. Probably, first focusing on China at the moment. There does seem to be an opportunity with China. They do have a strong interest in growing their krill fishery, and they are cooperating in that space well in the scientific arena. And so, leveraging those cooperation opportunities where they exist to try to find breakthroughs in this space. And then, I would just add, it's been brought up a few times this week, how much more important it seems in DC to focus on the Arctic versus the Antarctic. But as we've heard repeatedly, the U.S. is an Antarctic nation, and it's so important to maintain, that presence there and capacity there, and, whether it's continuing to support the great work of the researchers and develop the logistics that are needed to get them there to do the great work that's needed. As Andrea said, the U.S. aren't a proponent of the Domain 1 MPA in the Antarctic Peninsula, but that proposal is hugely underpinned by U.S. research. So just really continuing to step out and be that leader for Antarctic conservation. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Andrea, you can address to any government you want, including the U.S., Argentina as well, if you like. But what do you think?
I think I'll just add to what Nikki said. I think the entire community needs to keep building partnerships and share resources. I think the capacity building is key into building these relationships, not only within or among nations, but also with the fishing industry and with other key partners or players in the Antarctic. And I think it's going to take time, that we have to have patience. There's going to be a lot of frustration. There is already a lot of frustration in the system, and that we have to play a long time game, and we also have tools that we could start implementing or trying to put forward. Something that is very concerning on my side is like the sheer amount of information that is being requested for MPA proposals to move forward, and that is something that is not being seen equally for fisheries to proceed. So I think that we could try to come up with a way in which we are balancing those requirements, to ask them also to have that amount of information, because honestly, most of the information that is being required now is just impossible to gather. So that's just one way of blocking, or kind of instrumenting consensus blocking. And I think we have to be stronger with fishery management and how we proceed with it. It doesn't mean that we won't allow fishery to happen, but that we should be putting a lot more effort into accountability and information.
Thank you. John, same question to you, although I want to mention you talked about the excitement in the room and in Camelot back in 2016. I just mentioned that before we went into the plenary and this was announced, the chair of the commission, the Russian, had asked me out into the parking lot, and he sort of brought me over, and he had this big smile on, and he gave me this big hug because he had just gotten off the phone from Lavrov, and he said, "We're going to give you the MPA." Now, maybe these days I shouldn't admit that I got a hug from a Russian, so sorry.
Lavrov.
Yeah, no, well, I wouldn't get hug from Lavrov, terrible. But in any event, John, could you answer what would you want from the U.S. government?
Oh man, well, I think just a continued commitment to this place and the importance of Antarctica, and it's a well, I'll give you an example, okay? The foundation of the MPA proposal, that big paper that we wrote that David spearheaded with all of those scientists who came together, that was privately funded, okay? That should not have been privately funded. That should have been core to the Antarctic program, the U.S. Antarctic program, to bring those scientists together and figure out what needed to happen in the Ross Sea. That type of support and infrastructure needs to be built into our thinking in these other parts of the Antarctic, and I know it is to some degree, but it needs to expand, and we need to put more effort into bringing that science together into actionable plans. I think just keeping the pressure on. It was an incredible moment, and the Antarctic has only grown in importance, and we need to recognize that, its importance to regulating global climate, ocean circulation. All of those stories need to be absolutely basic to working in this area, and basic education for anybody who's going to be working in this area about how important this job is, how important your job is, and all of the people who are working for the Antarctic. That's it.
Thanks. So, Mia, you're from NOAA. You're in a position to fund all of this, what he's talking
yes,
about.
Of course.
Won't ask you whether you will do that, but if you have any thoughts on what can be achieved at CAMLR this session, be interested in your views.
Okay. What can be achieved at CAMLR at the upcoming meeting? That's a tough question. Honestly, we are certainly going into the meeting as prepared as we can, and we are going to chug along. We're going to be persistent because we do want to see a representative system of MPAs one day in the convention area. That is our goal. It's one of our higher priorities when it comes to CAMLR. So we'll do what we can. We'll continue to cooperate with other countries and try to bring them along. I hope that at this next meeting, now we have a fourth proposal under discussion. We've had some meetings already with some other countries about this, the Weddell Sea MPA Phase 2. We are working together to get it into a shape where all the countries might try to come to agreement on what that proposal should look like. So I hope that we can make at least that progress at the upcoming meeting, and maybe we can do more. I mean, maybe we can set out some next steps for actual adoption of the MPAs as well. I mean, that is certainly always what we hope for at each meeting, that we are able to adopt MPAs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
I just want to make sure too, if I had the floor, which I seem to, which I stole back, just not to forget the Ross Sea, because there's still a lot to do to make that a long-term, longer than 35-year commitment. There's research and monitoring that has to be organized, and Sharon Stammerjohn and Cassandra are both on the forefront of that, bringing together a 15-year plan to do the research, to defend the MPA, to understand it and its effect on the fishery and the fishery's effect on the MPA. That is work that still needs to be done. So we can't forget about the Ross Sea in the quest to get more MPAs. That was a major win, and we have to support that with the science to keep it going and bring it to full fruition.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. You don't just create the MPAs and move on to whatever your next issue is. You have to continue to focus on the science that can be done there, et cetera. Mia, do you have more?
Yes, you bring up a very good point, John. And I just want to mention that for the Ross Sea region MPA, there is a research and monitoring plan that hasn't been entirely endorsed by the Commission yet, but nonetheless, there is research going on. And we've had several countries describe all of the various research projects that are related to the MPA. Those were submitted and under consideration. So the work continues with implementation of the MPA.
Well, thank you. I think we've gone over time, so if you care to thank the panelists for their great presentations. Becca.
What an outstanding way to close our conference. Thank you very much. That was a remarkable panel, remarkable speakers. And it's been an incredibly rich couple of days. I'm feeling a strong sense of urgency about the scope of the challenges that we're confronting in Antarctica. And I think we've seen clearly the sort of premise of this meeting, that there are global challenges that have a key nexus to Antarctica and to its continued functioning, to the continued functioning of the system. And so I'm incredibly grateful to all of our speakers, and I want to also thank our partners So the State Department, NOAA, and the Coast Guard. I want to thank our supporters who made this possible, Lindblad, Battelle, and Herdegruten. I want to thank my team, Evan Bloom, Jack Durkee, Matt Tolliver, our Coast Guard fellow. I want to thank the U.S. Navy Memorial and the great team here. Thank you for hosting us. And I want to thank all of our remarkable speakers and our audience here and online. I am cognizant that the federal government is probably only open for a few more hours, and so many of us may have things to do with it before it shuts down, so I don't want to keep any more of your time today. But really, thank you so much. This is, I believe, the first time a meeting like this has been held in Washington, D.C. It will not be the last. We're really looking forward to continuing this conversation at the Wilson Center and working with all of you to do so. So let's please keep in touch. And thank you again so much for being here yesterday and today. Hopefully we'll be seeing each other again soon, having more of these conversations. And again, I'm so grateful to all of you. Thank you very much.